Mm.
I live in Phoenix, well, right outside of Phoenix, Arizona, in the US.
Mhm.
And to your point, it is a wonderful form of exercise. I tell people I discovered my inner outdoors woman being here because I grew up in Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, which is in the Midwest in the States. And I didn't discover that I loved hiking and the great outdoors until really visited Arizona for the first time in maybe 2005. And I visited Sedona, which is a beautiful, rustic, a little town that is a tourist place here. But I moved in part because I was inspired by the red rocks. It's just extraordinary, and it's allowed for me to connect with nature.
Mm.
Hiking has, and so I discovered my inner outdoors woman through just starting, and now I travel and
Yeah,
incorporate hiking wherever I go. I love it.
that's beautiful. And sometimes that's what you need, isn't it? When you go to a new place and you kind of experience everything that it has to offer, it shows you things that you didn't know. It shows you things you've missed. And that's what I like about traveling. And you travel a lot. We'll get to that, but that's what I like about traveling. I love new cultures, new experiences, new people. I love learning things. And I think I learn more about myself when I'm traveling and I'm exposed to new things than I do when because it can go both ways. You can go inside, which I have this year because I haven't been able to travel, right? Being stuck, just like many other people. And I've learned a lot going inside internally and just kind of thinking quite profoundly about me and how I perceive things and my behavior and how I can be better. And I've needed to do that. But I feel like I really do learn so much about the world, about me as a person, just by traveling, just by traveling. And it's not an easy thing to
What I
do.
hear,
Yeah.
no, it's not an easy thing to do for who?
It's not an easy thing to do if you don't have the budget for it. Like if you can't buy flights, and head over to like Japan, and you can't visit Japan. Well, I mean, okay, that's a stumbling block. And I wish more people had the chance. I wish more people could travel because it really does change you, doesn't it? I mean, maybe we can talk about that. How did you start traveling for a living? Because that's basically in your profile, right? That's in your bio, like you're a travel influencer.
Well, there's a lot I could say about this, but I'm going to start with saying I actually wrote a book called The Travel Coach and Journal, which hits on what you and I are talking about, which is I believe that travel has a transformative piece to it, which it allows for you to connect with the places that you're going, but also more deeply with yourself. And one of the things I talk about, and it's also been a part of my personal experience, that you don't really have to travel internationally in order to connect profoundly. The transformation happens within anyway. And I started, to answer your question, I started not thinking that I could afford to travel. As a matter of fact, my first trip was $199. It was a cruise from Florida. I want to say it's Miami to the Bahamas, and it was many years ago. And I remember thinking that $199 was way more than I could afford. It was like a 3-day deal. And I've gone as far away as Antarctica, which is something I did in 2018, and spent way, way more than that. And so my relationship with travel has changed over the last 20 years. And it's a part of why I'm really passionate about helping people to explore not just the place they're visiting, but to have a more profound connection with themselves. And it doesn't mean that you have to go far away. You can actually explore, I won't say in your backyard, but in your community. It's really taking yourself out of the normal routine of what you do and giving yourself the spaciousness to connect more deeply with wherever you are.
Yeah, that's really great. And I know that you wrote a book, and I kind of feel like it's full of wisdom because you have a lot of experience with this. When you travel, what are the key things that you look for when you're going somewhere new? Like, I mean, is there kind of like a structure to the way that you do things? Like, because I know everyone has their own kind of groove that they get into. What's important for you?
But there are a couple things. I would, and I don't have a problem with travel agents, but I would never use a travel agent at this point, in part because I start with a dream. And the dream for me is, what do I want to experience? How do I want to feel? What do I want to engage with? Not with only with the place that I'm going, but within myself. And so I start with the dream and a vision of what that looks like. And my goal is different each time. So for example, I went to Scotland and I went to Ireland, and one of the main things there for me was the castles. And so I created my travel around, going and staying at different castles, and also driving the countryside because it's incredibly beautiful and a lot of greenery. And I wanted to have my own unique experience with that. When I mentioned that I went to Antarctica, and I didn't just go to Antarctica. I probably spent 2 weeks beforehand exploring Chile and Argentina and Patagonia. And so I do quite a bit of research about the places that I want to go. Sometimes I want to hit certain places. Sometimes I want to linger longer. And so it's really a co-creative process, right? Me with me, thinking about the things I want to experience, but also sometimes I call them warrior tasks. I give myself things to do on various trips to help stretch me. So for example, the first time I went internationally, I was afraid to go as a woman by myself. And I created a goal for myself to go to pick a place that would have me get past my fear of going alone. So I picked Egypt. That was the first place I went alone. And I had a wonderful, wonderful time, and it helped to free me up because the task was for me to get past my fear and to also have a wonderful time. And so I took a cruise up the Nile. I did a number of different things. And so now it depends on the place and what I'm wanting to experience, and if I'm wanting to really challenge myself in a different way as to how I'll navigate. And actually, that's what I consider myself. I consider myself a navigator, which is a part of why I wouldn't use a travel agent, because when you use someone else, you're really allowing them to navigate the experience for you. And that's a part of the challenge for me, is in navigating the experience.
I really do agree with you. I feel like there's just a magic in finding your own way. And it's just like that with anything in life, really. I mean, you can read books, right? You can learn from mentors, and you can model yourself around people who've already done what you're trying to do. But I think just like when you mentioned with the travel agents, like if you take that element out of the equation, I think it really kind of reduces the experience and the kind of benefit you can get from it. It's a journey of self-discovery, right? And you find out that you can do these things, that you're capable of having magical experiences and actually succeeding to overcome obstacles. Which is, when you mentioned warrior, I can see that you are a warrior. Like when we talked before this call, you told me about your childhood, and I was blown away. And I wanted to talk to you about that. I wanted to ask you about what it was like for you to grow up and the kind of hardships that you went through to make you the person you are today. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Sure. At the end of the day, I think those experiences helped me to navigate in the world the way that I do. And one of the passions I have around helping women in that way is because it does build confidence, just, tied to the point that you mentioned. Once you train yourself really to be self-reliant, and sometimes when you deal with challenges, you become more resilient because you learn that I can do this. And not only can I do it, but I'm good at it. Or not only can I do it and I'm good at it, but I love it. And the more that you give yourself that freedom to really explore and to make mistakes, I think the more you grow and you do develop confidence. And so I think the challenges that I had, to your point, growing up, allowed for me to do that. And I had quite a few of them. I'd like to say my experiences are unique, but I don't think that they are. The research shows us that far too many girls, and I'll say boys too, are reared in households that are less than ideal. And that's my background. I grew up in a public housing community in Youngstown, Ohio, which basically means I was impoverished. I had a childhood that was full of abuse. My mother was the product of that. And as her children, I was as well as with my brother. My stepfather was an alcoholic. And because of those challenges, I ended up leaving home when I was 15. I got pregnant, I got married. And by the time I was 16, I had dropped out of high school. My daughter, who was 4 months old, had died of acute bronchial pneumonia. That's probably my most traumatic life experience, is being 16-year-old and having a 4-month-old baby die. It took me many years to work through just that experience of itself. And then after that, I ended up going back to school. I took the GED and passed it, and worked on improving my life. And I mean,
How did
without
you
giving
get
you
through? Sorry, I just want to interject. How did you
No
get
worries.
from the lowest point in your life to, oh, I'm going to do something with myself? Because a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't make it past that point, especially if they come from a background where maybe perhaps the support wasn't there, the mental, emotional support. What do you think it was for you that kind of pushed you back on track again with doing something with your life?
There are a couple things. And I think the saving grace, frankly, was my mother and her belief in God that she translated to me. And literally, I sat my mom down when I was 8 at the kitchen table, and I was like, "Mom, he's hurting us, and we need to leave." And she told me 2 things at that time that really changed the trajectory of my life. She told me that we weren't leaving, and that, sometimes when you love someone, you'll accept things you wouldn't ordinarily accept. And she suggested that we pray about it. And it impacted the trajectory of my life, because in that moment, I made a decision as an 8-year-old that my mother didn't love me because I was asking for help. And there was no help to be found there. And that impacted my relationship with her for many years, until I was able to heal and come to understand who she was as a woman and what made her make those choices. The other thing was that I need to figure out a way. And that's when my little inner navigator was born, I think. I needed to figure out how to get out of that situation and how to avoid being abused to the degree that I could, because basically he was allowed to do whatever he wanted to do, and her response was to pray. And so there were a couple things I learned from the challenge of that. One was the part of me that said, you need to figure out how to live and be okay. And the power of belief. So then I started creating in my own little world, very deep connection with God. I prayed. We went to church. So I developed faith in a sense of spirituality, and in the sense that I didn't know how I was going to make it, but I believed that I would, even when I was in the worst of my situations. Much, much later, the belief in myself and my ability and the use of prayer was very profound for me. Even as a little girl, I would have these conversations with God, and I felt as though I received responses back. And the response was just, I'm going to be okay. I believed that. And the power of that belief and my faith helped me, even when I was making arguably really bad decisions in terms of leaving home at 15 and dropping out of high school and getting pregnant. I certainly had people around me who thought my life would not end up well. And yet I still believed that I could turn it around. And in the worst of those times, I focused on that belief. I mean, it's very simple. I ended up, going to law school and then getting a PhD in psychology, later focused on spirituality and consciousness, because for me, the focus of who I was as a little girl and the power of that belief, and I'm going to say hope, and dare I say the connection with the part of me, even as a young child, who thought that there was something bigger in life for me, was very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up studying humanistic psychology, or humanistic and transpersonal psychology, because that aspect of me that was communicating with me, whether we call it intuition or, I listened to it. And even in the midst of the spaces where my life looked like I was going down a wrong path, quote unquote, I was still able to co-create with that part of myself something more meaningful. And I think we all have that. And it's to the degree to which we're able to cultivate and develop that relationship with that part of ourselves that's always nurturing us and pulling us forward out of whatever the situation is to our greatest, accomplishments or to our greatest light.
It's fascinating what you've just said, because I'm thinking of a number of different points that you made, but mainly I'm thinking about the spiritual aspect of it. And I'm thinking about what that looks like today compared to what it looked like when maybe you and I were younger, because it's very different in my opinion. I mean, I don't know what you think, and I don't know if you have conversations with young people often, but I do believe that we've lost a lot of that spiritual connection over time, whether it's religious or whether it's something else. And I do think it has had, in a sense, in certain aspects, like it has had a negative impact on, many facets of society. And when you said it's about cultivating a connection with something that is going to support you and guide you and give you faith in being able to achieve whatever it is you want and being okay in life, I feel like many people don't have that. So how do you see this challenge today? Because I can understand it. I do realize that there's a need to move perhaps away from very traditional religious mindsets, that are kind of, I see elements of that don't work today. But I also appreciate the message that it brings is like, now when I look back, because I started to lose my faith, and I would say I'm not religious, but I'm definitely spiritual, and I'm trying to find out what that means for me. So I'm still going through the process. What does it mean to you? Like, are you a certain religion?
No. So I love this conversation on so many different levels. Based upon research that I've done, most people don't consider themselves to be religious, right? Like, which basically means that there's a dogma and set rules. I think that model doesn't really fit. And this spirituality is beyond religion, right? It is this aspect that there's some other aspect of who and what we are that we have a connection to, whatever we call it, right? It could be called many different things. And the question is, how do we cultivate that relationship really with ourselves in more deeply meaningful ways? We don't have to go to church, quote unquote, in order to experience ourselves and our connection to something that's deeper than the things we do in the world. And I think, to your point, so many of us are struggle, and I'll say in the Western Hemisphere, but I think arguably everywhere, but because we're so focused on materialism and acquiring things, that we tend to be in a conversation of how much we can get, or to value ourselves by what we have, by way of title or socioeconomic status, or having YouTube followers, or Instagram followers, or whatever the followers are. It's how are we being judged outside of ourselves that give us a sense of self-worth and self-esteem and self-value. And that external focus really takes us away from cultivating a deeper connection with who we are. Is because when we do that, we have a greater level, I believe, of meaning and focus and a sense of purpose. And, back to the question you asked me, a part of why I feel as though I was able to navigate my life, even through growing up in poverty and having trauma and abuse and being a teenage, mother and all of that, is because this conversation about who I was as a person internally was always, I was always cultivating that conversation regardless of what was happening outside of me. And the older I've gotten and the more mature that I've gotten in this journey of life, really, the relationship I've cultivated with me, and it helps. It's probably even more so now than it was then, because I'm 50, almost 52. I don't judge myself in the way that I did about what's happening outside of me. My sense of self and being connected, grounded in that, whether I am living in my purpose, whether I'm connected to what's most meaningful to me, whether I'm living in beauty and honoring my sense of integrity and values, those things are what help me to feel not just grounded, but comfortable in my own skin wherever I am in the world. And I think we all have to find our way to that. And when we are so overly focused on what we have outside of ourselves, it makes it way more hard, and I remember struggling with that myself. I guess we're just talking, so I can say this. Growing up not having, I was very much motivated to have a sense of financial security. It was one of the reasons I went to law school, because I was working 3 jobs and working those 3 jobs to make enough in order to support my daughter, because I ended up having a second daughter and being a single mom. And I was like, I can't continue to work 3 jobs. Not only was I not sleeping and getting rest, but I was also responsible for a young person. So I went to law school in order to help change the laws that impacted women, but also went in order to make enough money with 1 job to support my family. And then I got caught up, as many lawyers do, in law school, because I had all of this debt that I had to pay back. And so the desire that I had to work primarily with women and women's empowerment, that was my interest before law school. I put that to the side to start, working in a law firm to make money. And I think many people make decisions very similarly. We focus on making money in order to survive and hopefully to thrive. And then we put kind of the parts of us that make our heart sing, we put it kind of on the shelf, or we may have a hobby that allows for us to express ourselves, creatively, or to express ourselves in more heartfelt ways. And I think that there is a way that we all come to it, to the degree that we come to it for ourselves. But that's the journey, and that's the cultivation. And if we can, I do talk to women in particular, but younger groups, because I think if we can come to those conversations with ourselves sooner, if we can make peace with ourselves sooner, if we can turn the mirror reflection internally sooner, then we don't really have to put ourselves through so much struggle and really pain, with not being grounded in who we are, not living more authentically, more open-heartedly, not having, I'll say, the coherence between our heads and our hearts. And I think many of us struggle with that. We're not alone.
What I've realized is it's the values that come with, let's say, traditional Christianity that I think were very valuable in kind of creating the kind of society where someone, for example, would always think about what's the right thing to do, what's the moral thing to do. And I don't want to dive into like a religious humanities conversation, but I think it's just interesting to note that as time goes on, we lose these values and it affects our society. It's like a perpetuating cycle of, let's say, just selfishness, because now we're not, like you said, we're not thinking about ourselves so much and what's important to us on a spiritual level, but we're more bringing in to fill that void from outside. And I think there's generational cycles. I think that there's booms and busts. And I think we're going through a huge boom and bust. We've come out of the boom and we're going into the bust now. So that's probably going to explain a lot of what's happening around the world. But yeah, it's something that I do recognize it's just a journey. I think it's what I still am working on it, but I came to that realization too with Unleash Love. I spent a lot of time chasing money and it was interesting, but it wasn't fulfilling. And the funny thing is, if you don't remember that you initially started out with, when you're younger, you're kind of like, oh, what do I want to be when I'm older? Like, I've got all these ideas, these ambitions. I'm courageous. I want to go out in the world and I want to see things and I want to experience things. And then you kind of grow into a young adult, and you're like, all right, let's put all that to the side because I've got to make money now. And then you make the money, and it's really important to remember those things you put to the side, because if you don't, you end up maybe further down the line, you look back and you think, oh God, I've just wasted so much of my life chasing money, doing these things to pay the bills. And it's so tragic. So that's why we get into this conversations. Like, I know this is a relationships podcast. I probably should be asking you some relationship related questions, but it's about empowering the relationship with yourself too. It's like, well, what can we do to grow within ourselves?
We are in a relationship conversation. We're in a relationship conversation because the relationship you have with yourself is the foundation for every relationship you're going to have with anyone else. And in fact, the talks that I give, that is the foundation of the conversations that I have. And depending on what we're talking about, many of us, in particular, I'm going to say women, don't really cultivate a relationship with ourselves. We tend to be caregivers to families, children, spouses, partners, communities. And there's this sense of selfishness that we sometimes feel when we want to take time away to spend time, money with ourselves, really developing this relationship. And I think that it's a tragedy for everyone, but in particular for women, because we tend to be the rock in the spaces that we occupy. And so when you're not necessarily grounded and you're trying to please and you're giving all that you have, and particularly I'm going to say professional women, because that's where I spend quite a bit of my capital. We're busy, right? We're very busy in the world, taking care of things, right? Developing our businesses, developing contacts, relationship building, working on building the business, whatever the business is, and giving your all, and then not often quite feeling like you're doing any particular thing really well. That's a very common experience. Or feeling depleted at the end of the day, like I'm doing this, and this, but I'm exhausted. And I feel bad about being exhausted, or who has time for yourself when you got all of these things to do? That those are very common things that I hear. And so this idea of having a relationship with yourself and really spending quality time nurturing that, understanding how you feel, not just about the things that are happening in your life, but how you feel about yourself. Are you satisfied with who you are? Do you feel successful in a way that is meaningful? I get a little torqued because we push, I think, this narrative of, being successful, and that equates to a certain dollar amount in the world, building your business and having this, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we often sacrifice our own quality of our lives, whether it's meaningful. I have a woman, for example, that I work with who is a very successful lawyer. She has a book of business and a whole office, with other lawyers that report to her, and paralegals and secretaries, and she hates it. So she's really successful, but that's what our conversations are. She's like, I hate it. And she hates it more and more because of how the business has changed, the law practice has changed, and the connections that she used to have with her clients has changed. But she has a whole litany of people who are depending on her. And so it's like golden handcuffs, right? She feels like I can't step away, even though I want to go do something else, because I have all of these people depending on me. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's wonderful she's been able to build that. But if you have no life in it, how successful are you?
Yeah.
It depends on your definition of success. Right. And so working with changing the definition to one that really lights you up and doesn't make you feel like you're imprisoned in your own life is essential to this cultivating a deeper relationship with yourself.
What do you
and
think
honoring
that
yourself and respecting yourself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you think that's like a culture issue? It's a culture issue. Yeah.
No doubt.
And so when you work with these ladies, predominantly ladies, right, who are professionals, and they want to somehow improve their happiness, their joy, fulfillment, their success, new definitions of success. How do you get them to detach from that? Let's call it an obsession with kind of fitting in with their
The
perceived
cultural
role.
norm. I don't want to call it an obsession. I'll call it the cultural norm. There's a lot of pressure in this world that we feel to be successful with the narrative of what success looks like.
Mhm.
And so you and I were talking about a little earlier about confidence. There's a piece of confidence that's really required, I think, to chart your own path in the world, particularly if it doesn't look like what everyone else is doing. Everyone else is achieving success or working on it or building it, or, and yours might look differently. And so this call to the inner experience, right, of intuition, I happen to believe, just because it's been a guide, a co-creator with me in my life, it doesn't steer you wrong. So where I really point the people that I work with, and there are some men, but mostly women, I have this belief system I'll tell you about in a second around why I'm passionate about women. But I really help point them to what their own heart is calling them, this sense of coherence and listening to your heart as well as your head, and getting quiet and taking this time away and cultivating a deeper connection with yourself so that one can hear, how spirit might be speaking to you. Because sometimes when we're so busy, there's nothing can get in. Our cup is already full. And quite often what I hear in the beginning is, I don't have time. Who has time to even meditate? Who has time to, spend time? I don't have time for that, because it's so full that, people don't feel like they have the spaciousness. And really that's not the truth. What that says to me is you haven't prioritized you.
That's it. Mm-hmm. That's exactly.
And so that's where I start. It's just those very basic sense of, well, why don't you prioritize you?
Mm-hmm.
What's getting in the way of you feeling like you can take an hour or two, maybe a day, in a 24-hour day to feed your own hungers?
Right. And what's the normal response to that?
Normally there's something out in the world that's more important.
Yeah.
It's the commitment to building something, taking care of someone. And so we start just in those conversations to help bring light, right? Bring light to, I wasn't aware that I didn't see it like I'm not prioritizing myself. Like sometimes there's a collapse between myself and other. I'm taking care of you, and that makes me feel good. We oftentimes feel good when we're taking care of other people, and it's not the same thing.
Yeah. The fact that, so I was a fixer for a long time. When I would have a relationship, I'd look for someone that needed me. All right. Just because there was a number of reasons, but I think the main ones were I liked the idea of being someone really helpful and valued. And so in the relationships, and I still do have many issues. So, we would kind of go back and forth with each other, trying to point out, maybe you need to work on this, maybe you need to work on that. And I think it's such a different dynamic when you're with your partner and your partner is telling you or trying to bring your attention to something that maybe, you need to change the way you think of something so that you can get better results. Maybe you're not happy. Maybe, they've got some important things to say, but you don't see it because you're so close to them and you're so involved with them emotionally. And there's a lot of layers of history there. And the point I'm trying to make is, if you hire a therapist or a consultant like yourself to get involved, I think that kind of breaks a lot of those rules and kind of allows someone to really open up. I think what people sometimes need is just someone to talk to, someone who isn't going to judge them and hold them, accountable to like past promises or past versions of themselves. Is that why you said you were going to talk about why you work with women as well? What's the reason for focusing on women?
because I think women are going to save the world. That's why I think when women wake up to the power of who and what they really are, and they're not um, ingrained in this belief that causes many women, not all, but many women to have a sense of insecurity about their value and worth and their power. When they wake up, the world will change. And so I'm very passionate about this conversation about claiming the power of who you are authentically, which means the fullness of yourself, because so many of us kind of put, we quote unquote man up when we're in male spaces, right? The idea of expressing emotion or intuition or a number of things are perceived as weakness, and we don't bring our total selves to the spaces we occupy. And I think that does a disservice to who we are, but also we don't show up fully. And I think a part of claiming your power is claiming the totality of who you are. And I think when women do that, when they wake up to the truth of who and what they are, they'll wake the world up. Because not only do we birth nations, because we do, but we're also the backbone of much of the work. We're in the workforce quite significantly. We own quite a bit of businesses, at least in the United States. I know it's not the same around the world. Mm-hmm. And so we're already in the spaces, not necessarily claiming our power, which means we're not in the leadership roles to the degree that we could be either in government or business or in civic engagement. And I think once we wake up to who we are internally, then we'll claim it externally in the world. So I'm very much passionate about that. I want to say something to a comment that you made, though, about hiring a person like me. That's how I started. I hired a coach, I don't know, 20 years ago. And I was actually struggling very much in my life at that point. I had achieved a number of goals. I had become a lawyer. I had married for the second time at 28 and was married to a lawyer I met in law school. We had acquired things in the world. And, I had a house, a second home. We were traveling. And I had reached the sense of quote unquote success in the world. And yet I felt, I'm going to say empty and a little meaningless in what I was doing. My clients were financial services organizations, and I was a commercial litigator at the time. I got bonuses. Like life was good in a material sense, and yet I was not satisfied. And I was wondering what's wrong with me. I should be happy,
Absolutely, yes.
and that's when I started inquiring with myself, why am I not happy? What, and unfortunately I was in this conversation of what's wrong. Something's wrong with me because I should be happy. That I probably spent 2 years in that, like, what's wrong with me? As opposed to listening, right? There's a way to listen to life. And I wasn't listening. I was judging. And so I hired someone, and she started asking me questions that I hadn't asked myself. Well, and some of those questions were, well, what is this that you're feeling? What is it? What are you feeling? And then it had me go towards, well, what am I feeling? If I weren't judging it, what would I? And so this deeper level of inquiry, and I came to an awareness that the life that I was living was not the life that was trying to live through me. There was a deeper experience that I was longing for. And I would say spirit was calling forth in me. And eventually I opened up to experiencing what that was for me. One of the first things that she helped me to do was to redefine my definition of success. It was very narrow. Mm-hmm. Like I had to do everything right. That sense of perfectionism, that many of us, but certainly women encounter, I became aware of in my early 30s and started intentionally addressing. I redefined my definition of success to mean what it is for me right now, which is living a life that I love. It's very simple. And I gauge whether I'm successful with whether I'm living a life that I love. And if I am, I'm on target. It has nothing to do with, acquiring things the way that it had. It freed me up tremendously. And so after working with her, I shifted my life in a whole host of ways. I claimed not just my power in terms of my truth, which is a part of my power, right? It's my truth, myself, and what was really most meaningful for me. Once I got aligned with that, I was able to shift a whole host of things because I gave myself the spaciousness that I needed. And so I became a coach myself, and then have been on this journey of listening and responding to life and to the essence of who I am. And so now I co-create and I invite people to dance with me in this uh, awareness of the fullness of myself and how to express that in the world in a way that is meaningful.
Did you find that you and your partner were not aligned anymore after that? Because I'm curious as to the dynamics there.
Here's what I found. We were never aligned. We were never aligned. Oh my God. Listen, he's a wonderful man. I ended up getting divorced. But here's what I understood. To your point about relationships and why I think it's so important to have a relationship with yourself cultivated. I would have never married him had I been true to myself. He's a wonderful guy, and we're still friends. But I was people pleasing when I married him. He wanted to get married. I didn't want to lose him. So I said yes. And it's not what I wanted. And in fact, I spent the whole year trying to talk him out of it. I look back at who I was at that point, and he told me then, he said, you're ruining this engagement for me. Because up until the day we got married, like the day I was like, we don't have to do this. We could turn it into a party. But I never listened to me. I wasn't listening to the fact that I was trying to talk him out of it. I wasn't listening to the fact that that it took me 4 days to give him an answer. I wasn't listening to me. I was trying to focus on him changing his mind. I would never do that today. But because I wasn't really connected to my truth, I wasn't honoring myself and what I really wanted. And I was afraid to let him go.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, the journey isn't an easy one, right? I mean, I think that's a part of why we acquiesce in relationships, because we don't want to lose the person. And, I can't say it was a bad choice. It was a learning opportunity. I learned about myself. I learned what I needed, and I won't ever do that again. I just won't do it again. Because I don't think ultimately it works out anyway. That's what life has taught me. It doesn't work out anyway, because I was in the marriage and content with him as long as I played the role, but then I wasn't being true to myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's why I struggled for 5 years. I mean, that was a part of the struggle, because I didn't want to leave the marriage. I was, people depend on you. I had, by that point, had a second daughter. I didn't want to break up the family. And so the struggle was really a struggle within myself. And the process helped me to at least clarify the struggle was never with him.
Yes.
It was never with him.
Yes. That's really very, very mature because it's not aligned with how we usually see these problems, right? It's always kind of like a battle between, us and them. They want me to be like this. I don't want to be like that, But so I'm curious, do you want to are you in another relationship now, or do you have trouble finding people who align with you now that you're very much on your journey?
Well, here's my philosophy. I am in relationship with everything all the time, right? I mean, I am in various relationships. I'm not talking about a partner right now, but I'm in a relationship with the universe, with myself, with my family, with my community. I engage wholeheartedly, or at least that's the challenge I give myself, to be fully present in all of my relationships. I'm not in a loving relationship with another man right now. No.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I don't want to claim hard, because I actually think it's very easy to get in a relationship. The challenge I have found is the relationship good for me?
Mm-hmm.
Because the place that I've come to an awareness, I have a greater awareness now of who I am and how I show up. I've not necessarily always tuned into whether the person was good for me. And so now that's a part of what I look forward. How do we co-create with one another? Are we aligned in those ways? Because the consciousness I had around being a good partner and doing for the other person, I've healed a bit of that. And so, I have had relationships since my divorce. They've been good. I normally transition people to friendship because I don't love folks and leave them.
Sure.
If I've loved you, I feel like I'm always going to love you. It doesn't mean that we are great as partners. So that's what I would say about that.
Gotcha. Yeah. In my, just to kind of riff on what you're saying, it's similar for me now, even though I really was just coming out of a relationship in late 2019. So it's not been that long at all. I had a long string of relationships, 18 years of relationships. And in that time, I never gave myself the space to breathe and actually think about, well, what, like exactly the things you said, like, who am I really? What do I really want? And now what's happened is, because I feel like I've spent this time working on it, I'm worried. I think there's parts of me that are worried that it's going to be a lonely journey for a while, because I just simply am not willing to jump into a relationship with anybody anymore. I want to make sure that it's someone who aligns with me, like you said. And I say a part of me worries because I know that this is a good thing. I know it's not a bad thing. This is actually much better than the alternative. But there's definitely that part of me which kind of thinks, oh gosh, this is, we're going to have to get really good at being with ourselves for now,
No, I appreciate what you're saying. And I'll just say that for me, the word is fear. If there's certainly an element I thought, I have moments where I become fearful, like, I'm a little bit more particular now than I was, although it's not a bad thing. My level of tolerance isn't the same. I'm not willing to sacrifice myself in the way that I was. And, there is an expectation, obviously, in relationship that, there's give and take, but at the point where I know that I gave when I didn't want to, that's the part where you got to make peace with yourself. And that's for me, at least, a practice. So do I have moments when I think, I recognize now I'm sapiosexual. I didn't even know there was a term for it. I'm like, oh, that's me. I came upon that term as I really need to have a mental connection with someone. I love to talk about politics and to talk about social issues. I engage with my community. There are a number of ways in which the mental, and then very much tied to the secondary for me, spiritual connection is incredibly important. That alignment is not really an option. That's the part I've come to make peace. I've made peace with myself around who I am now, recognizing I'm evolving, so I may change. But I wasn't aware of who I was earlier, and so I couldn't make peace with it. And I was sacrificing, not even knowing until later, and then I became resentful and angry. I'm not that woman anymore.
Yes.
And so I think I have conversations with people about this. On some level, it feels a little bit more complicated when you actually do know yourself.
Yes.
When you've lived a little and you go, oh, okay, I made that mistake twice. Look at it.
Because
I didn't know what I was doing.
Your previous biases.
Right. Now you're like, oh, here's this dynamic showing up. How am I going to engage? And I think, and this is kind of leads into as we increase our level of awareness, right? As our consciousness raises about who we are and how we engage with the world, there is a level of responsibility to be good stewards, not just of ourselves, but in how we engage with other people. Do we really honor them by engaging in a relationship when we have a sense that
like
it's
an
not
integrity,
really for us? Yeah, it doesn't really do us any good. And it doesn't do the person any good either. And so, to the point, it's complex, and yet it's very simple. And do I worry? When I lose sense of myself, I worry. Because the the truth for me is if I have faith that what's meant for me won't be denied, there's no reason to worry.
True. Very true.
There's just no
That's a
reason to worry.
faith.
So for me, it relates to faith. And so, do I have a partner right now? No. Do I believe? And I get hit on. Could I have a partner? Yes. Are the people that I've met, are they probably good for me and I'm good for them? No. So I could do that, but would I really be serving either one of us?
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. So on, someone asked me a question recently, what are the green flags when you're looking for someone to trust? And I said, integrity is one of the green flags for me. It's like, do they do what they say they're going to do? Do they, live by their values and their principles? And it's a very difficult thing to do because there's so many vices out there. There are so many ways to get that emotional need met. But it's like, do you know what your vision is? Do you know what your mission is? And it's part of my affirmation every day. I know it will change over time, but for now, part of my affirmation is I draw power from my vision and clarity to achieve my goals and fulfill my soul. And it's like, without that vision and clarity, I can't have that power. That's why I was floating at sea so long, because I didn't have the vision and the clarity. So coming back full circle to what you're saying is like, you help people to get that vision and clarity. You work with them to make head and tail of what it is that they truly want, and lead them down that path, regardless of how difficult it might be. And it's usually very difficult. So I appreciate that very much. And go ahead.
I was just going to tweak something because I don't lead people down a path. I think we all intuitively know what path is there for us, and we don't give ourselves spaciousness to discover what that is. So a part of what I do in the working with people is to help create the spaciousness for them to walk their own path with heart. I do lead these travel trips for women around the world. I have one coming up in September, assuming all goes well with the COVID situation. It's a documentary that is inspired by the lives of 3 women of color who overcame trauma to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, which is Africa's highest peak. And so the project itself is really aimed at what we've been talking about, which is, how do we make meaning and purpose of our lives, particularly when we start off with less than ideal circumstances. And these 3 women have done just that. And frankly, I think many of us do that. Like, we take struggle and we turn it into triumph every day. And we don't necessarily see the beauty in how we're all extraordinary, because we're always in the process of becoming and working on things and healing things. But the reality is there's a way to awaken to our own greatness and really to just see the beauty of who we are. And that's what this documentary is about, from the perspective of these 3 women. And I'm in the process of really seeking funding for the project right now. But it's the project of itself was born out of my leading women on these trips, where they get a chance to discover who they are in a deeper and more profound way. My desire is to inspire women to explore themselves, to explore the world, even if that means they take a weekend getaway. They don't have to go to Tanzania to do that.
And when you've done these trips, obviously you've experienced, this is why you're doing the documentary, because you've seen on a number of occasions how they transform and the process that they go through.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the trip to the trip to Antarctica that I mentioned, there were 2 women who went to Antarctica with me. And this was 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. And I still get messages from one of the women who says, I'm still unpacking that experience. And I'll get a thank you note. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for, there was a piece of courage that they had to get past in order to make that journey. Financially, there was, things that they had to get past. But also going that far away, the route we went and a whole host of other things. And so when you're unpacking an experience nearly 3 years later,
Yes.
it's clear that it's not just about I went here and I came back. I went and I came back fundamentally changed.
Mm.
And
So
that's
it's,
the transformative power of travel.
yeah, so it's not shopping in coffee shops when you get
No.
there. Okay. Right. This sounds really interesting. I actually am very excited for this because it's the kind of thing that I personally would love to do. I mean, I've done it before, but the process you go through sounds really interesting and very profound. So I'm excited for this.
Oh, thank you. Well, hopefully, I can share with you a clip from creating a sizzle reel related to the experience. I want to get the word out about what we're doing and why it's important, in particular, to show women of color. There's a very negative connotation that Black and Brown and other people have, but certainly women, about who we are and what we're capable of in the world. And a part of this next phase of my life is I want to show positive images of women to other women, because my desire is to help inspire them that no matter if you've had trauma or you're an immigrant or you're in poverty or you're just trying to work things out, you can create an extraordinary experience in your life, and it's not limited by your current circumstances. So that's what this documentary is about.
That is really powerful because I've also noticed that that's a problem. And I think we're going through what you could call a revolution right now, where the balance of power is shifting and women are starting to, and this is one of the reasons why people don't understand, like, why am I doing this for women? Mainly because the majority of my audience are women, right? I mean, a lot of content's for women. And it's because I recognize exactly what you mentioned before, earlier on in our conversation, that the rebalancing that power, because I do believe it's a balance, and I feel like it is out of balance, and it has been for a long time. Rebalancing that power is one of the key things that need to happen in order for us to survive, because it's so imbalanced right now, and you can tell. You just have to look around. So we need to bring that back to balance. And so what you're doing, I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it's totally on point. I think it's what we need right now. Even when I look for stock images of diversity, it's so difficult to find people represented, in just everyday scenarios. So anyway, that's just one tiny thing that I noticed, but I do believe in you. Anything I can do to help, just let me know, and we'll publish it. And I want to see the documentary. I definitely want to see it when it comes out.
First of all, thank you for that. I appreciate what you're doing. It's, you're elevating women and elevating their voices and showing a different narrative. I think at some point we'll get to a tipping point. That's my hope, that as we continue to show inspirational, positive stories of women, that we will wake up, right, to another reality, and as opposed to allowing the narrative coming from society to fit us into some hole. That's a part of claiming our power. And so the more that we can do that together to help change those narratives, I think we'll get there sooner. So thank you for what you're doing. And I'll definitely provide information to you.
Absolutely. 100%. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope we get to do another one.
Oh, me too. Thank you for reaching out to me. I appreciate you very much.